Oh boy, Breath of the Wild and the timeline. So you think the game takes place at the end of the Downfall timeline because Matpat said so? Alright boys, let's get to work. Hey guys, it's HMK, and I'm here with a couple of friends to tear down the tyranny of the game theorist's supposed claim on the Breath of the Wild timeline placement. I mean, it isn't really all his fault. He made a theory and should have accepted it as such, but too many people are taking this as fact. Theories are supposed to be discussed, so consider this a discussion. No hard feelings, Matpat. So with me, I've got Commonwealth Realm and Zeltk.
Hello everyone, Conrad here with Joseph.
Hey, what's up? I'm Zeltk. You know, the British guy who never uploads.
Hey guys, check it out. It's like we're the Triforce of Zelda lore topics or something. Whatever, moving on. The timeline placement for Breath of the Wild has been a topic for years now. Yes, years. It started way back when the first trailer dropped in 2014. Goodness, it's been that long, hasn't it? And it seems it's not going to be stopping anytime soon until Nintendo drops the confirmation on its placement. They've even stated that they're apparently leaving the discussion and debate and speculation on its placement to the fans. Keeping things interesting, I guess.
And as much as people claim to have concrete evidence and indisputable placements of the game in the timeline, as HMK pointed out in his previous video on the subject, Breath of the Wild has way too many inconsistencies present in the game that keep it from being in a solid place. At this point, all we can do is theorise on what would be the most plausible place in the timeline where Breath of the Wild could fit without breaking it.
However, the game theorists have put out a theory on where Breath of the Wild could take place in the timeline. Even though the timeline they put in the video was wrong, I mean, just saying, if you're going to make a timeline placement video, at least have the placement of the other games right. And whenever a theory video is put out by the game theorists, it's always going to have that good chunk of followers that believe it a little too much and spread the word like it's gospel. So that's where we come in. Consider us the theory checkers, where we were going to go with fact checkers, but we're disputing a theory here.
We're here to take this theory and its points and rip it to shreds right before your eyes and dismantle the notion of Breath of the Wild taking place in the Downfall timeline for reasons Matpat talked about. Let's dissect the points in the video, add evidence that Matpat apparently missed, and leave you on better thoughts of Breath of the Wild's Zelda timeline placement than what the game theorist wants you to believe.
Be sure to hit that like button, share the video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Also be sure to check out and subscribe to Zeltk's and Commonwealth Realm's channels as well, as we all do awesome Zelda content. The thing about the game theorist's placement of Breath of the Wild in the Zelda timeline is that the video incorporates some very hard cherry pickings almost midway throughout the video that literally looks over inconsistencies of the proof that is brought up for the case of the Downfall timeline, while ignoring extremely potent physical evidence within the game itself and lore-based evidence within Breath of the Wild and other games that connect it from each of the other existing timelines.
One mere thing that the game theorist and what many people who speculate on Breath of the Wild's timeline placement is missing is in order to have a concrete placement of the game within the timeline. Not only must you bring evidence backing the particular timeline that you wish to place the game in, but you also need to disprove and debunk the other timeline possibilities thoroughly in order to be concise with your claim. And the game theorists didn't do that. Massive overlooking.
With that being said, we need to get a bit of understanding on how Breath of the Wild relates to the overall timeline in terms of, well, time. There's an incredibly long time between the last game in the timeline, in any timeline, and Breath of the Wild, since we do have confirmation that Breath of the Wild is indeed the last game in whatever timeline it does take place in.
We need to take into account that there could be a radically large unknown period of time between Ganon's first strike on Hyrule as Calamity Ganon and the previous game, and then we have to apply that 10,000 years after the attack leading into the events of Breath of the Wild. That's even pushed by time as the actual in-game events take place 100 years after that. It's at this point that this gap by itself could be even longer than the entirety of the Zelda timeline before it. So why bring it up? It's all about the things that survived to this point of Breath of the Wild, including monuments, recognizable aspects from the past, and consistent lore that aligns with individual origins despite the huge amount of time, and that perhaps the time could corrode elements passed down through the years, just like in real life. But when talking about monuments, otherwise known as in-game physical evidence, we have structures such as the Temple of Time and Lon Lon Ranch that obviously calls back to Ocarina of Time, and those two structures still existing rather miraculously in Breath of the Wild could pull for either the child or the Downfall timeline. As we all know, in the adult timeline, Hyrule gets washed away, and there is no way structures like that can survive both a flooding and a test of time. I mean, come on, that's wood. You expect me to believe something like that will still be standing after a flood and more than 10,000 years? Yeah, no.
Continuing on the subject of physical monument, The game theorists said something that is very peculiar about physical evidence or proof about the Child Era. That it simply ends at the words spoken at the knighting ceremony, Hyrule Castle's location and architecture, and the mural found in the HD version of Twilight Princess. When it doesn't, if you roll on over to Goron City and check out the monument of the Goron Patriarch's past, you can see the likes of Daruk, Darunia, and Gor-Koron, one of the elders of the Zora Tribe in Twilight Princess and the previous patriarch before being succeeded by Darbus. There is no disputing that it is indeed Gor-Koron, as you can see his hair and trademark goatee matches with the Goron Elder.
And since he only existed in Twilight Princess and is in the Child Timeline, I'd rather say that this evidence alone is pretty damning for the Child Timeline, but we can take this multiple steps further.
While on the subject of Gorons, how about let's talk about the fact that Gorons seem to be completely MIA in the Downfall Timeline in Hyrule. I use the keyword Hyrule because the Gorons only exist within the Downfall Timeline in the Oracle games in the lands of Labrynna and Holodrum, not Hyrule. You mean to tell me in the closely monitored games within Hyrule that are in the Downfall Timeline don't feature Gorons, and you're going to tell me that somehow magically their absence meant absolutely nothing in the extremely long 10,000 year gap between games? Remember what we said about that gap. Be sure to remember that because it's important.
While we're talking about things that existed to only disappear in the Downfall Timeline to be theorized to magically reappear in full force at the end of said timelines, which is pretty asinine, we can go off a list which includes the Gerudo, the Great Deku Tree, and by extension, the Kokiri that eventually become the Koroks. The Sheikah as a tribe, as the only known trace of the Sheikah in the Downfall Timeline is Impa, and just Impa. But going off that, with the tribes that we do have in the Downfall Timeline, we do have the Zora Tribe. However, the tribe that exists in Hyrule within the Downfall Timeline is a Zora Tribe that is very different from the Zoras seen in Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild. These are the green and quiet volatile beast-like Zoras that seem to have evolved or devolved from the Zoras known from the Unified and other timelines. These Zoras are nothing like the friendlier, more civilized humanoid Zoras that we know from the other timelines, to the point where their culture and kingdom are nearly non-existent. I remember why I keep bringing up the point about the time gap that comes into play for those who want to claim that Breath of the Wild is within the Downfall Timeline. So 10,000 years for the Zoras to miraculously evolve back to what they were known for and to have their kingdom return in glorious fashion? Extremely unlikely, especially if we were to combine this notion with the fact that Zoras have been keeping a record of their history along with Hyrule's that you could read up anytime within their domain.
Continuing with that thought, the game theorists claim that the Lynels being in Breath of the Wild is concrete evidence backing up the Downfall Timeline. That no other timeline has had the Lynels, so it would make sense that Breath of the Wild takes place in the Downfall Timeline because the game has them. Well, it would, except that would be a fallacy when looking at other enemies in Breath of the Wild and where they have existed in the Zelda timeline. Specifically Choo-Choos and Lizalfos that have never existed in the Downfall era, not to be confused with Gels, Buzzblobs, or Geru.
That brings us to our next point. The Fokar? Really? Like we have pointed out before, there are similar tribes and enemies within The Legend of Zelda that are not to be confused with one another. Case in point, what Matpat says about the Fokar just to justify the Rito being in Breath of the Wild as a part of the Downfall Timeline. And while the Rito in Breath of the Wild do differ from the Rito in the Wind Waker, they are the same tribe and probably had the same origin regardless of the timeline. Same as the Zora, which funnily enough acts as the precursor tribe to the Rito. So saying that the Fokar, who don't have wings by the way, eventually get repurposed into the Rito at some point after the adventure of Link is not only a subjective statement but has its notion completely destroyed by other elements within the Zelda series.
No cigar on that one, buddy boy. And now we get to our boy Ganon, the Great King of Evil. Now the point that the game theorist tries to make is that the Calamity Ganon's appearance as the Calamity falls in line with the Downfall Timeline, where Ganondorf becomes the Demon King Ganon through and through after attaining the other two pieces of the Triforce. Well, that's all well and good, except that he tries to make the point that Calamity Ganon shed all traces of humanity, which I beg to differ, as I've theorized before that the Calamity Ganon you fight in Breath of the Wild is actually Ganon desperately trying to return to a physical humanoid form, as you can see that the head of the Calamity Ganon is comparable to that of a grotesque human skull that retains the features of Ganondorf in Twilight Princess. The hair, the gem placement, it's all there. features that are non-existent in the Downfall timeline according to Matpat. So why would Ganon want to return to these specific features as Calamity Ganon more than 10,000 years plus all the time taking place within the Downfall timeline when he seemed to be perfectly fine as the Pig Beast Demon King Ganon in those games? Exactly, because the form he was trying to take as Calamity Ganon was the form of Ganondorf in Twilight Princess, which is the most relative form he knows. To push the point even further, when Calamity Ganon is defeated and becomes Dark Beast Ganon. You cannot get more specific than that, Dark Beast Ganon. And you know where was the only other place we've seen Dark Beast Ganon? In Twilight Princess, the Child Timeline.
Now, we come to the climax of Matpat's video. The tunic, the hat. That's not yellow, people, it's a green. Definitely nowhere near to the color represented in other hats within the Downfall timeline. If you want to talk about the hats in a manner that would make a convincing case, then the Cap of the Wild actually seems to be a little bit more in line with the Cap of Twilight. But you know, using the hat, not exactly your best bet.
Speaking about items in the game that could be attributed to a specific timeline that we can talk about are the DLC items, since amiibo items are not fair game. We can meet at that point, Matpat, you cool. But DLC as a concept has shown to be canon in many games that incorporate it, and with something like the Trial of the Sword alluding the return of Fi in the game and the EX rewards being told through Misko, a mysterious individual already in-game before the DLC items can be disputed heavily for the side of being canon, which includes items like the Majora's Mask and the Fused Shadow, which are both exclusive items to the Child timeline. But to be fair, we also have the Phantom Armor, which only existed in the Adult timeline. We can't overlook these things, Matpat.
Things like this bring up aspects within Breath of the Wild, where there are existences or callbacks to numerous games across all the timelines, which branch out into things like geographical locations. Mount Daphnis, Lake Mikau, Toto and Lulu, Kaholit, Arbiter's Grounds, Great Bridge of Hylia, Linebeck Island, just to name a few if we're going to talk about physical evidence.
But now I want to wrap it up with two extremely important factors within the Legend of Zelda series, and that is the Master Sword and the Triforce. With the Master Sword, a lot of people fail to realize that the Night Ceremony wasn't just talking about the games within the Zelda timeline just for the hell of it, and perhaps showing what timeline it is, but whatever. It is talking about specific adventures Link, or the hero, had with the Master Sword. When looking at the timeline and Zelda's speech, it aligns with the only times Link has wielded the Master Sword in three important adventures: Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, and Twilight Princess. The other times in the other timelines would be in The Wind Waker, A Link to the Past, and A Link Between Worlds. The three games within the unified timeline into the Child timeline seem to be the most foremost and incredibly specific. However, we are all aware at this point of the German and Japanese translations that also reference The Wind Waker and A Link to the Past, which, like I've said before, are adventures of the Master Sword with the hero. So that event pulls the perspective into question, but I feel the direct line of the first three games takes priority.
When looking at the Master Sword itself, the design of the blade continues in the same design as in both Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess. I mean, why are we arguing this at this point? This right here is better proof than a hat.
And lastly, we get to the Triforce. No, the Triforce by name wasn't entirely focused in Breath of the Wild, but many believed, us included, that the sealing power is indeed the Triforce, but the knowledge of its true might has been lost to history, naturally or forcefully. But how did the Triforce become complete by Breath of the Wild?
Well, if we are going by the Downfall timeline, that is a no-brainer, as the Triforce gets recompleted in the care of the royal family at the end of Zelda 2. In the adult timeline, the Triforce along with Hyrule is gone, so GG that timeline. Seriously guys, we can keep debating on the child timeline versus the Downfall timeline, but seriously, the adult timeline is impossible, so stop that. But with the child timeline, Ganondorf loses his Triforce power. Its whereabouts are unknown, but if we were to theorize on it, it could be possible that the Triforce of Power could have returned to its point of origin, which would be the Sacred Realm, which would also theoretically be in control of the royal family. And with Link and Zelda still having the parts, it could be logical that they gave them up in order to recomplete the Triforce and keep it within the rule of the royal family, which would explain it being completed in Breath of the Wild.
So like I said in the beginning of the video, it is truly going to be unknown where Breath of the Wild will take place in the timeline due to the inconsistencies that have come down to the wire. But the proof and evidence that Matpat brought up in his theory don't add up in the slightest when you're talking about the downfall timeline, and I feel that we made it exceptionally clear in this video. So before you take Matpat's word as gospel, or when you see a friend share his video on Facebook as proof for the Breath of the Wild timeline placement, remember this video and always think about it first, because it was a theory. Yep, it was a theory. I hope this gave you some hard clarification, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a comment with your thoughts and theories. Be sure to like the video and share with your friends or groups that need the clarification, and subscribe for more Zelda content. Be sure to check out Commonwealth Realm and Zeltk's channel for more Zelda content and other collabs that have the three of us working together. So until the next Zelda video, get hyped and stay hectic, because I've been HMK, and I'll check you guys later.